Hello everyone, welcome all. I'm Verônica Volpato, and this is one of our 4 talks promoted by Almeida Idenho Gallery of Art. It's part of the exhibition Homens Trabalhando. And today our guest is Alise Tifentale. Alise is an art and photography historian based in New York City and Riga, Latvia. She holds a PhD in art history from the City University of New York. Her fields of expertise include sociology of culture, cultural analytics, photography in social media, global history of photography, transnational history of cultural networks such as photo clubs, and art and photography of Latvia. Tifentale is author and editor of several books. Her articles are published in journals such as MoMA Post and Photo Researcher. In 2003, she co-curated the exhibition North by Northeast for the Pavilion of Latvia in the 55th International Art Exhibition, La Biennale di Venezia, Italy. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. And please make yourself comfortable to get started.
Thank you, Veronica, for a very nice introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation, for this opportunity to talk about my research. And let's just begin, and I will now share my screen because I want to show you some images along the way as I'm talking, and we will begin immediately. So I'm sharing, and I will put it on full screen. Okay, everything is good. We are, you see my screen. Wonderful. At the very beginning, before I begin my presentation, I also wanted to briefly emphasize and to repeat that I am not a historian of Brazilian art, and but during the last 10 years or so, I've been extensively studying the global photo club culture, or photo clubismo, as my Brazilian colleagues would call it. And it's been inevitable to recognize the central and the exceptional role that Brazil and São Paulo in particular had in this culture. So the focus of my today's talk is the role and significance of Brazilian modernist photography from the perspective of this global photo club culture. I will outline the scope of the transnational photo clubismo of the 1950s and approach it through the work of the International Federation of Photographic Art, or FIAP, an organization that united hundreds of photo clubs, including the Bandeirante or FCCB, and they united photo clubs for more than 50 countries, and thus made this photo club network visible. I'd like to begin with a mention of Brazilian scientist and photographer José Oiticica Filho, whose career serves as one significant connecting link between the global photo club culture and Brazilian modernist photography. Besides perhaps more well-known and more influential Eduardo Salvatore, Oiticica Filho was one of the advocates of Brazilian participation in the global photo club network, including the Brazilian participation in FIAP. And he was also one of the few photographers at the time who tried to verbally conceptualize the importance of photo clubismo beyond a simple competition among photographers. Although resident of Rio de Janeiro, Oiticica Filho was also a member of the São Paulo-based Foto Cine Clube Bandeirante, or FCCB, as I will refer to it later. And he was also an outstanding supporter of the work of FIAP. And Oiticica Filho is especially relevant to our discussion of the place of Brazil in the global photo club culture, because his work embodies, as I see it, both what was typical to the global photo club culture and also all that was exceptional to Brazil. For example, things that were typical to the global photo club culture, for example, this dedication to cultural exchange, internationalism, and strong emphasis on the aesthetic and visual features of photography as opposed to narrative. And what was exceptional and special in Brazil, that is exemplified by his modernist visual vocabulary and his attempts at theorizing and conceptualizing this photo club culture. In 1951, José Oiticica Filho wrote, I quote, "For me, the most moving aspect of looking at a photo club salon catalog is seeing the names of Brazilians entangled with names of artists from other parts of the world. This is what patriotism means to me, a type of sane patriotism expressed in seeing my name and the name of my country among names of artists from other countries, democratically positioned as equals," end quote. His idealism about photographers from many countries coming together in this one forum, and as he wrote, democratically positioned as equals, I think perfectly characterizes at least one aspect of this global international photo club culture of the 1950s. This shared idealism about transnational and democratic forum for photography is one way how to approach the vast photo club culture that experienced an unprecedented expansion after the end of the Second World War. And many clubs had existed already before 1950, of course, like FCCB and many others. But photographers established new clubs and also joined existing ones in increasing numbers during the 1950s. And here on the slide is just a small sample of different photo club logos from across the world, just to represent the variety. And of course, there are several social, political, and cultural reasons of such an expansion of photo club culture at this particular time during the 50s. So one obvious reason is linked to the economic recovery and development after the end of the war that provided in many countries, provided more and more people with the means to purchase a photo camera and enough leisure time to learn the skills and also develop an interest in the creative potential of the medium. All these, I think all these aspects are necessary for photographic culture to evolve. And among the geopolitical reasons of such increase was the decolonization and foundation of new independent countries after the end of the World War that also helped to promote and to develop this photo club culture. And the less obvious reason perhaps is sociological, and it's also less straightforward. And I would like to talk a little bit more about that because it's, I think, the most interesting the most interesting of the reasons of this expansion of the photo club culture. And first of all, we have to acknowledge that the role and place of photographers, as well as photo clubs as institutions, very much differed from society to society. And for example, in France, as sociologist Pierre Bourdieu has brilliantly demonstrated in his 1965 book, translated into English as Photography, Middlebrow Art. So in France, several and quite clearly defined social functions of photography had formed. And his book has a really unique place in the history of photography, I think, because it was the first major sociological study about photography. That is the first evidence and fact-based examination of the field, as opposed to the subjective and personal essays and critiques of photography that dominated the field before Bourdieu, and still continue to do so even today. And just a little bit of what he was saying about photography in France. So first, let's take a look at this left side of the slide, where I just tried to simplify very briefly how Bourdieu described the field of photography in France. The most widespread social function of photography in France, according to Bourdieu, was family photography. It is also the less prestigious and the less skilled type of photography. So at the very bottom of the so-called pyramid. And from there, the social prestige and the level of skill just go up. And for example, the second social function was amateur photography. And in France, according to Bourdieu, that implied working class membership of photo clubs, like people who work in factories and so on. And then the next level was photojournalism, and at the very top there was a very small fraction of photographic practices that Bourdieu called his book considered it art. But apart from Bourdieu's book, there are no similar sociological studies of the time that would have been carried out in other countries. So we don't have actual data, actual studies to compare, but we can observe some similarities. And I would like to say that somewhat similar to this system as Bourdieu described about France, I think the situation in the 50s was also similar in the United States because a well-developed socioeconomic system of photojournalism was in place. And photography also began to appear in the circuit of art galleries. So it was kind of clearly segmented, let's say. And also West Germany had a similar structure. And during the 1950s, West Germany at that time invested a lot of effort in rebuilding its authority as a photography equipment producer. And with it also came a strong community of professional photographers, photojournalists, and also a vast field of amateur photographers. But apart from these, and maybe some other couple of other countries, many other countries and many societies did not have this clear-cut cultural and socioeconomic hierarchy of photographers. So where the photographers could exhibit, socialize, and build their identity. And the obvious answer at the time was in a photo club. So that's the right side of the slide that I tried to somehow visualize how that would look like in most other countries. So we can see that the photo club, the institution of photo clubs offered space for amateur photography as well as for professional photojournalists, and as well the production of photographic art was related to this photo club environment. And the only thing that we can see that the family photography was clearly separated from this more elevated activity that took place in the photo clubs. And we can see that some of the contributors to the photo club culture that we see in the FIAP publications were professionally successful photographers, also photojournalists who worked in magazines, newspapers, in publishing houses. And at the same time, they also participated in photo club activities because that was the only space that provided an opportunity to exhibit photographs as art. And these, we can observe these differences also in the example of Brazilian participants of FIAP. Then we will see later some examples. That they were also members of this photo club culture, but probably more like in this diagram, because they were not, they wouldn't fit this Bourdieu's understanding who are the typical photo club members in France, like workers who meet up after day in a factory. So that was a completely different social group. So all these photographers joining photo clubs in many different countries, they didn't have much in common at the same time, but I would like to say that they shared this one organizational model, so the model of the photo club. And most of the photo clubs at the time, including FCCB, operated as volunteer, non-profit, and non-governmental organizations, as we would classify their work today. Of course, at that time, they didn't use such terminology. But even more importantly, photographers across the world conceived of the photo club as just one basic modular unit, which operated within a larger system. And in such a system, clubs in each country united in national federation, for example, and these federations then gathered in this metaphorical assembly hall called FIAP, or the International Federation of Photographic Art. And at that time, in the 1950s, FIAP was the first and the only organization that answered the urgent need for unification among photographers across political, ethnic, and economic boundaries. And this need for unification mostly came from societies where photography hadn't reached that level of professionalization as it was in France, or the US or West Germany, let's say. In the rest of the world, in most other countries, photo clubs still provided the major platform where photographers could exhibit and discuss creative, their own self-commissioned creative work. And in many aspects, we could say that FIAP aimed to become the equivalent of the United Nations in the field of photography. They used a similar language, that they want to provide equal opportunity and equality between all member countries. And of course, such phrases sound naive today and empty, but I think that they carried a powerful message in the 1950s, and they echoed the idealistic humanism of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, for example. And I think that was a very kind of a very timely language at the same time in the 1950s. Established in Switzerland in 1950, during the next 15 years, FIAP brought together national federations of photo clubs from 55 countries in Western and Eastern Europe, Latin America, Africa, Asia, and Australia. And that is the new aspect that FIAP brought into this world of photo clubs, that there is this voluntary and non-governmental organization that equally welcomes participants from all parts of the world and treat all member countries equally, regardless of whether they belong to what then was called the first world, second or third world, or in today's terminology, the global north or the global south. And that was something that had never happened before, and that would also not be imaginable before 1950. And in June 1950, Brazil became the only non-European country among the 15 founding members of FIAP. I think it's extremely important. The main areas that FIAP was organizing its work was publishing the photo books, organizing a FIAP Biennial, and circulating its official magazine. We're going to see some of these in a short while, but first of all, a couple of words about how special was the place of Brazil in the work of FIAP. The founder and president of FIAP was a Belgian photographer, Maurice van der Weyer, and he is known to have visited Brazil and São Paulo in particular numerous times during the 1950s, at least in 1952, 54, 56, and 60. So it seems like every 2 years. And during these trips, Van der Weyer contacted several organizations of photographers. And for example, here at the beginning of his trip to Brazil in 1960, he stopped in Santos, where the members of the local photo club greeted him in front of the city hall with a big banner. And here also we see that during the one of the other trips to Brazil, Van der Weyer visited the organization which represented Brazil in FIAP. At that time, it was called the Brazilian Photography Federation. And later, this federation was called, in some documents, it's mentioned as Photography and Cinema Federation. So Eduardo Salvatore was president of this organization, just as he was the president of FCCB, and seems like he was Van der Weyer's close acquaintance. And during his visit to São Paulo in 1960, here we can see that Van der Weyer was invited to serve as the honorary chair of the Brazilian Photography Federation's management committee meeting, where he discussed the Brazilian participation in FIAP with Salvatore and a couple of others. And I would like to just say that these frequent visits were outstanding at the time, because transatlantic travel in the 1950s was not so simple or accessible as it is today. And that this effort just shows that establishing and maintaining a close relationship with the Brazilian photographers and was especially important for FIAP. And one of the reasons why it is so, I think, is that FCCB expressed the ideals of the photo club culture in the most straightforward way. And those ideals, for example, today I'll briefly talk about two of these that I think are most important. That first is establishing a platform for exchange among photographers. And the second is to create alternatives to the image circulation in the press, to offer a different platform for exhibiting and sharing work. And about the first, about the exchange among photographers, one of the central ideals of the photo club culture of the 1950s and the early 60s, I think, was establishing this platform for interconnectivity and cultural exchange. And of course, individual mobility was the most desired form of such cultural exchange. But of course, during the 1950s, it was available only to very few photo club members, very few photographers. And I think it is even more significant that they, those few photographers who were able to travel widely, that they often chose to visit São Paulo and FCCB. We already mentioned the president of FIAP, Maurice van der Weyer, but also we know that photographer Anne-Marie Heinrich from Argentina visited FCCB and São Paulo on a couple of occasions at that time. She was a well-known portrait and fashion photographer, and here she is in the same meeting up also with José Oiticica Filho, and this is just an example of the work that she shared in this global photo club context. She was a professional, a successful professional photographer working with celebrity portraiture and nudes, but she was also seeking acknowledgement of her work in this photo club culture. So that was for her, as for many other professional photographers, an alternative channel to circulate her work. Another example, another photographer who visited Sao Paulo was Taiwan-based Chinese photographer. At that time, his name was transcribed as Chin San Long, and that's how it was used in publications at that time. Now this transcription has changed, and today scholars call him Lang Jingshan, but it's just the same person. And he was one of the leading figures in Southeast Asian photo club scene. And here he's visiting also FCCB. And here is just an example. One of his to the left is one of his most well-known works, and to the right we see the cover of the FCCB magazine at the time when Chin San Long was visiting visiting the club. And his work is characterized by the use of his own technique of composite images, or a type of combination print. And he developed his visual style as an expression of deep nostalgia for a historical Chinese elite culture that he left behind when he was escaping the communist government in China. So, and he was well-known figure among the Chinese immigrants internationally, and he was using also the photo club networks as channels for circulating his work. The other main aspect of the photo club culture is exhibitions. And talking about FIAP, one of the major accomplishments of FIAP was establishing and organizing the FIAP Biennial. That was an international exhibition of creative photography, and all member countries were invited to contribute the equal number of works, and that was one of the ways how FIAP tried to demonstrate this equal opportunity that they offered to all member countries. So this is a rare image of the from a biennial that took place in 1952 in Austria, and there is another photograph of the exhibition, how it was installed in 1952, the same exhibition installed in Cologne. And this is another very interesting image from the from 1956, when the fourth FIAP Biennial was opened in Cologne, West Germany, within the framework of the International Photography Trade Fair, Foto Cine. And only after, much later, after the 60s, the biennials gradually extended to other continents. So during the 1950s and 60s, FIAP biennials themselves took place only in Europe. But the most important resource about this photo club culture is the FIAP yearbooks. So photo books that document these biennials. And those were distributed internationally to all the member countries, and that was the main channel of circulating their work. And here are the covers of some of these photo books. 7 such FIAP yearbooks were published between 1954 and 65. And each book is a hardcover, large format photo book. Each contains about from 120 to 150 full page, high quality, nicely printed photogravure reproductions. And just a couple of words of the organization of these books, because that's also something particular to FIAP. Each country was represented by an average of 4 to 6 photographers, and each photographer usually had only one work reproduced. And images in the FIAP yearbooks were always grouped alphabetically by the country of photographers' residence. So here we can see that the works by Brazilian photographers appeared usually at the beginning of the book, between Belgian and Chilean photographers. And this way of organizing the images in the book also demonstrates how FIAP was trying to offer equal playing field to all members, all member countries, not trying to somehow, I don't know, elevate or somehow emphasize Europe or any other country. So that's very unusual for a photo book to be organized that way. And I would like to show you a couple of spreads from these FIAP yearbooks with images from a couple of different countries, and then we'll return again to FCCB photographers in FIAP and how their work looks in this context. So this is a typical spread of these from one of these FIAP yearbooks. We can see that there are no captions on the same page. There is a minimal amount of information about each image included separately at the very end of the book, and also not a lot of information. Usually the photographer's name, a short title of the work, and a couple of technical details. So this is another example, another spread. And for example, this spread is interesting, and that shows that Brazil did not have a monopoly on abstract images, for example, or abstract or semi-abstract images. And some other photographers in this photo club culture also produced work like that. But of course, these photographers are less well known. And the same is about all other visual styles, as we can see, for example, in this spread. And from today's viewpoint, I think one of the first things that stand out when we look at these photo books is this non-existence of a unified visual style, lack of a signature style, so to speak. So let's see just one more example. So this is from 1960 yearbook, and the books document the variety of all the visual styles and the photographic practices that that were relevant for photographers in different countries and different locations. And I think that's really really unique, and that's something that hasn't been documented elsewhere. All this variety of approaches and variety of visual styles. And the global photo club culture at that time welcomed all these practices and united them under this very vague term of photographic art. It didn't, this term photographic art didn't signify any particular visual style, let's say, but referred only to all self-commissioned creative work. And I think it can't be stressed enough that in most FIAP member countries, photo clubs still at that time were the primary institutional framework that provided this place for such photographic practice, for photographic art. The clubs were the only places that exhibited, published, and promoted this creative photography on a regular basis. And now let's see some of the work by FCCB photographers. Today we recognize FCCB as the creative hub of the Brazilian modernist photography, but also looking at these FIAP yearbooks, we can see that FCCB photographers explored various different aesthetic sensibilities, and these aesthetic sensibilities existed side by side. So, for example, here in the FIAP 1954 yearbook, we can see the work by Germain Lorca, White Rooftops, which we could say is a modernist work, and it was circulated in the 1950s. And also I saw it reproduced in the book that was published in 2016 on the occasion of the big FCCB exhibition at the São Paulo Museum of Art. And next, the other work here is Ademar Manarini's line, which captures kind of very interesting fluid shape in the movement created by shade of human figure, which is partially like a transparent screen. And both works, we could say, are quite modernist in their aesthetics. But for a comparison, let's see in the 1958 FIAP yearbook, a completely different aesthetic dominates the Brazilian section. These are also works by two well-known FCCB photographers. Then we see to the left is a work called At a Tenement by Jean Lecoq, and to the right is Children by Francisco Albuquerque. And these two works, we could say, are closer to the so-called humanist photography that was also extremely popular type of photography in the 1950s. And its special focus was on human experiences, on daily life, ordinary daily life, oftentimes captured on the street, and widespread subjects included children. So all these elements are right here. Meanwhile, we look at some other example, and here this spread on the 1960 FIAP yearbook, for example, features work by José Oiticica Filho and José Yalenti. And this is perhaps the most, the closest to our today's understanding what is the modernist work of FCCB photographers. And here we see Oiticica Filho's abstraction is completely non-representational. We'll return a little bit to this work a little bit later. And in Yalenti's architecture to the right, we see fragment of a built environment which is rendered almost unrecognizable. There is a heightened contrast between shadow and light areas, and they that just create a composition of geometric shapes that somehow emphasize the flatness of the image in a way. And then the next spread from the 1960 yearbook is a typical result of this alphabetical organization of these yearbooks. Here is the work by FCC member Emil Issa, featuring a detail of a modernist high-rise building. And it's next to a close-up of a plant by a Chilean photographer, Adolfo Neumann. And I think this contrast also reveals that these interest in multiple aesthetic sensibilities was typical not only to FCCB, but the whole field on the global scale. Photographers were looking in different directions at the same time, and what they understood with this photographic art very much differed from country to country in terms of aesthetics and subject matter here. And finally, we see Eduardo Salvatore's work also was included in FIAP yearbooks. He is known as the leader of the of FCCB, and Also, oftentimes he is mentioned as the leader who strived to modernize the aesthetics of the club. But in FIAP yearbooks, his own creative output is represented by these two works. Um, mm, and we could say that lines, the work that is here on the left, lines, that work embodies some of the modernist aesthetics, but the other work, composition with a horse, that meanwhile belongs to the pictorialist aesthetics. The work has kind of very romantic undertones, and the subject matter is rural, nostalgic, symbolic. So it's also kind of a quite typical pictorialist work. And Oiticica Filho himself produced work in two distinct visual styles during the late 40s and 50s, namely this pictorialism and modernism. And both were circulated in the photo club exhibitions and also in FIAP yearbooks. And Oiticica Filho emerged on the global photo club scene with a photograph entitled Kiosk here to the left, which is a typical example of pictorialist aesthetic. And then the work to the right, Abstraction, is an example of his later interest in non-representational photography. That also is one of the traits of the modernist photography. And I think this comparison is useful because histories of FCCB and also history of photography oftentimes presupposes a clash, some kind of conflict between the so-called old pictorialism and the new modernism. But looking at what kind of images FCCB photographers circulated in these FIAP yearbooks, we can see that these different visual styles oftentimes overlapped and existed side by side. And I would say that they often existed as some kind of parallel lines of creative inquiry, of aesthetic exploration that could be pursued. Let's see. Couple of words, really briefly, a couple of words about the another important function of the photo club culture, to provide the alternative channels for image circulation. And those were the photo club salons, the salon exhibitions, and the catalogs that subsequently circulated those works. And they were important because in many countries, these salon exhibitions provided the only alternative to the main use of photography, which was in the press, in the newspapers and magazines. Here, just an interesting slide I wanted to show, just just a collage of different salon exhibition catalogs from different countries. And so these salons were usually regular, mostly annual international exhibitions organized by photo clubs, and these salons were composed by a jury that selected images from a pool of works that were received following an open call to participate. These were definitely non-commercial, completely outside the kind of economic exchange, which is different from the image circulation in the press that was always commercial and based on professional principles. So it's important to these salons are important because for most photographers in the 1950s, they provided the main outlet for their work, the main way to show their work as photographic art. And of course, we also know that São Paulo photographers and FCCB were somewhat an exception also in this aspect, because they had at least some opportunities to show their work, not only in this photo club context, but also in the context of professional art. And just referring to the opportunities that the FCCB photographers had to exhibit their work in the São Paulo Biennial. But that was also, I think, a very rare exception, and that was not possible at that time in most other FIAP member countries. And the colleagues of FCCB who were working, for example, in India or in Hungary or Hong Kong or whatever, they didn't have this access to art spaces. To move closer to some kind of a conclusion today, couple of words about the other important contribution to the work of FIAP that José Oiticica Filho contributed. Besides being an artist and circulating his work in this photo club culture, he was also compiling extensive statistical data about hundreds of international photography salons, and he published some of these lists in the FIAP publications. Here is one example from one FIAP yearbook, and he also published some of these data compilations in the official magazine of FIAP Camera. And just a couple, literally just a couple of words, because it's a very interesting topic, and lots of raises a lot of other further areas that still need research. But I think let me show you another example how it looks. So it's like this list of names that Oiticica Filho compiled, looking at numerous photo club catalogs of these salon catalogs, and they are extremely important and extremely interesting, because these lists they reveal a very large and dynamic system that was transnational and based on this participation and also competition, and also shows, for example, here also the one of the lists detail all the Brazilian participants, the most active participants in this salon exhibitions, and this list also includes most of the FCCB photographers, such as Albuquerque, there is Gertrudes Altschuh, Gaspar Gasparian, Kazuo Kawahara, Jean Lecoq, Eduardo Salvatore, and Oiticica Filho himself, and others. So this is a very rarely found documentation of the scope of this photo club culture, and that is the work of José Oiticica Filho. Just to I see that it's time for me to begin wrapping up the my talk. Just at the very end, I was just thinking that today we know more and more, we learn more and more about the Brazilian modernist photography, São Paulo photographers and FCCB, and they are all becoming highly visible internationally. And At the same time, almost nothing is still known about this broader transnational, international context where these works circulated during the 1950s and 60s. And to end with the same, that like we began with the same image of José Oiticica Filho, I just hope that these studies of this exceptional case of São Paulo photographers of FCCB will also somehow promote a greater interest in the what was typical at that time on this broader photo club culture, and the more new research will lead to a better understanding of the global photo club culture at mid-century. So I say muito obrigada and thank you.
Muito obrigada. Thank you for a lecture. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
Okay. So I have a couple of questions for you. First of all, can you talk more about how this international network functions and what was the role of Foto Cine Clube Bandeirante played on it?
FIAP, this organization FIAP was established as an attempt to coordinate the work of this of the photo clubs, of this network of photo clubs that was expanding in the 1950s. And I believe that FCCB was really an exceptional club that found a notable place, not only its local cultural scene in São Paulo and Brazil, but also internationally in this broader area of photo club culture. And because FCCB, I think, embodied these ideals of the photo club culture in the most, let's say, in most visible way. That was the commitment to cultural exchange through exhibitions and publications, socialization, and also commitment to producing work with the emphasis on the aesthetic function of the image, not let's say narrative. And FCCB also that had an outstanding role in FIAP since the very foundation of FIAP in 1950. I think the contribution of FCCB also is in the promotion of this modernist and abstract or semi-abstract visual vocabulary within the photo club culture. That definitely is important. And also I think very important is the first attempt to somehow analyze and conceptualize this photo club culture, to document it systematically. That is also important, and that came from the initiative of José Oiticica Filho. So I think those are some of the most visible contributions.
Very nice. So other question is, in a context of Cold War and FIAP having noble goals such as equality, as José Oiticica wrote on the quote that you read for us, why do you think FIAP did not cause an impact on the photographic world?
Yes, that's a great question, because yes, indeed, FIAP had this idealistic vision, which was, I think, very timely at the time in the 50s. It was very relevant. But today, if you ask any major photography historian, they wouldn't have heard of FIAP. They wouldn't know anything that such an organization existed. But I think the key is that the FIAP did achieve a lot, but not in those places where historians would notice, if that makes sense. Because from my research so far, I see that the photo club culture was the most relevant, the most important at that time, in locations that historians still would call well, at least until very recently, they would call the cultural peripheries. So it's the so-called global south, for example, or this difficult region in Europe between the Soviet Union and West Germany, like countries like Poland or Romania, or what was then called Czechoslovakia or Yugoslavia. And also Southeast Asia, for example, countries like India. In all these places, the photo club culture and also FIAP had really notable significance. But those are not the places that that the history of photography is being written. For example, we know that most of the histories of photography are written from these Western cultural metropolises, from Paris, Berlin, New York, and so on. And in these places, the photo club culture didn't have such a big impact. So because they are writing from their own perspective, these historians, they haven't been able to even touch upon this this topic, because just look at any of the more or less important book about photography from mid-century and also later, and how many of them are written somewhere outside, let's say Paris or New York or some of these other centers. So I think that's part of this broader problem, and I think within the last 20 years for sure, this field of history and theory also is expanding, and we are now more open to these different modernisms, different global and not necessarily this one narrative. So
yes, I think so too. Well, unfortunately, we don't have any time more. I'd like to ask you more questions, but our time is running out. We have only 2 minutes, 3 maybe. Anyway, I would like to thank you very much for accepting our invitation. And if you want to say something, we have 2 minutes just to finish.
Thank you. I can also only say thank you again for this wonderful opportunity to talk about the photo club culture and photo clubismo. And as a conclusion, I could only say that I hope that this concept of this network of clubs and this collective activities that the photo club culture promoted will eventually find more more historians to write about it and to examine and to study it, because I think there is still so many interesting aspects to discover, especially in that area of these cultural exchange and connections, that I think it's just so exciting to study.
Yeah, I think so too, and I hope we can talk more about this maybe the next time, the next meeting.
Absolutely, I hope so too.
And for now, thank you very much, and maybe see you soon. Bye bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.